We bow our heads for prayer. Oh, loving Father in heaven, we do give you thanks and praise for your wonderful kindness and your tender mercies. We thank you, Father, for this beautiful Sabbath day that you have given to us. We thank you for the wonderful sermon that was presented to us. It has thrilled our hearts, Lord, and we just want to thank you, Lord, for loving us more than we even know. We thank you for the physical food that we had. It was delicious and we enjoyed. Pray for the hands who have prepared the meal. And now, Lord, we are on the second phase. I pray that you will come, your presence will be with us. Whatever is presented to us, dear Lord, it will help us to be better men and women for you, that we can win souls for your kingdom. We are inviting your presence now, dear Lord, to be with us. And whatever we fail of asking you, do not fail it to grant it unto us, as we, your children, do humble pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Evening, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. But thank you again for staying behind to join us in this afternoon's program. At this time, we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn it over to Elder Dana Edmond so we can learn a little bit about our church history and regional conferences.
Thank you, Elder. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, no. Let me try that again. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. You all are making me nervous again. Thank you. Thank you for coming and staying. One of the challenges is, I remember when I was in college, nobody wanted to take a class after lunch. So this is class after lunch. Thank you for coming. We're going to get right into it. We're going to do a couple of things. The first thing, let me tell you what I'm going to tell you before I tell you. The first thing, I'm going to spend about 2 or 3 minutes telling you what actually I do, because exactly 0 of you know what the Office for Regional Conference Ministry does. Then we're going to talk about African American Adventist history, and we're going to do it from the context of regional conferences. I'm going to tell you what they are. I'm going to tell you how we got them, and I'm going to tell you then why we still need them. All right? So we're going to do that in that order. If you have questions, just feel free to just raise your hand anytime, because I'm assuming most of you are like me. If you don't ask, you'll forget. Okay, so just raise your hand and we'll stop. And we'll try to get you out of here. All right? First of all, let me tell you a little bit about what I do. The Office for Regional Conference Ministries is the entity that's responsible for coordinating all the things that regional conferences do together, okay? Now, that's one of the things we do, but let me give you some examples that you would know about. Okay, the first thing I want to tell you is most people do not know that more than half of all Seventh-day Adventists live on the continent of Africa. More than half. Okay? Which means when you add all the people who live in Africa with those of us who descend from Africa, that means the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the largest single demographic group in the Seventh-day Adventist Church by far, are people of African descent. Come on, somebody needs to say amen. The majority, the overwhelming majority of Adventists look like you. Now, most people don't know that, okay? But when you add the people from Africa to the people from the Caribbean, which is where most of you are from, and to the African Americans who live in the United States and Canada and in Europe, the church is the largest demographic group in the Seventh-day Adventist Church by far are people of African descent. When you add the people of Spanish descent, then the church is somewhere around 75 to 80% people of color. Okay? So what my office does is it coordinates all the things that regional conferences do, and on a limited basis, the things that connect us to the rest of the world made up of people who look like us. So let me give you two examples of that. 4 years ago, we had the first African American Leaders Summit in Nairobi, Kenya, where the leaders in Africa met with the leaders from the United States. Okay, my office coordinated that. Then, when we were talking about doing that, one of our Caribbean pastors said, "Okay, you're talking about going to Africa. The Inter-American Division's office is in Miami. So why would you go to Africa and not go to Miami?" So last year we had a summit meeting between the regional conference leaders and the leaders in the Inter-American Division. My office organized that. Out of that came a joint evangelistic effort where people from regional conferences went to the Inter-American Division to do evangelism. I went to Trinidad. Some of the other people in my office went to Belize or Jamaica, places like that. All right, our office coordinates that. Our office, most of you've heard of Breath of Life, right? Okay, Breath of Life is in our building, and we subsidize them at the rate of about $300,000 a year. Okay, we also subsidize Message Magazine. You've heard of Message Magazine? Where I met your pastor was at PELC. That's the evangelistic. That's where the pastors from all over the regional conferences come to Huntsville. Our office subsidizes that. Once a month, this program is called First Sabbath. We interview news makers and the leaders of our church. We have the General Conference president on. Next 2 weeks from now, we'll have the North American Division. It's an interview program. We have the president of the Inter-American Division, Dr. Alex Bryant. He'll be our guest. It comes on 5:30, the first Sabbath of every month, on the ORCM Facebook and YouTube channels. All right? So those are some of the things that, so our office basically functions as a union. All right? All right. That is, now down here you get the Southern Tidings, right? Okay. The regional conferences have a news magazine. It's called the Regional Voice. That's the QR codes where you can get it free. Everybody hear what I said? Free. All right. It cost us probably $100,000 to put out, but we're giving it to you for free. All right, so there's the QR code. It comes out once a quarter, okay? Comes out in, the next edition will be the spring edition. That's in April. The summer edition is in June. The fall edition is in September. And the winter edition is in December, all right? I'll give those of you trying to snap that QR code the opportunity. And that tells you what's going on in regional conferences, okay? All right, I'll wait for one more person to take the last picture of the QR code, and then we are off. Okay, now, good question. Okay, my office and the retirement office, the regional conferences, I'm going to talk to you more in detail about the retirement program. Each conference sends 10.25% of their tithe. Okay, and that funds our retirement program, and it funds my office. All right? Okay. Now, some people say, okay, why are conferences like Southeastern funding two unions? Because that's about what each conference sends about 25% of their tithe away from the conference, and it goes to the union, who sends it up to the division, all that kind of thing. Okay, so what we did was we took the money that we were using to fund the NAD retirement program. We took that money and so it's not an extra cost. It's just a shift of where the money went. That's a very good question. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to talk about what is a regional conference. They're in the United States, and in the United States alone. This is the only place where we have this. In the United States, there are two kinds of conferences. A state conference, which are all the churches in a state forming a conference, like Florida Conference. That's a state conference. Regional conferences are all the churches in a region coming together. So while most people think that regional conferences refers to black or ethnicity, it doesn't. It refers to territory. Now, regional conferences are black administered, but regional conferences are open to anybody who wants to come. So when you come to our office, you'll see what we call the Hall of Nations. There are 90 flags in that hallway, and they stand for, every one of those flags is a country where we have a member in a regional conference from that country. Okay, so regional conferences are by no means limited to black people. We have all kinds of people, including white people. When I was a conference administrator, I hired the first Caucasians, first Caucasian pastors, the first Caucasian school teachers, because I do believe in diversity. As we will talk about later, is the sad thing about diversity in the United States and the Seventh-day Adventist Church is diversity is not a two-way street. By that I mean diversity occurs only when people of color go to majority culture institutions. The reverse doesn't happen, okay? So, for example, there are plenty of black people in Florida Conference. Plenty of black people. There are hardly any white people in Southeastern Conference. Okay? So diversity in the United States and in the Adventist Church is a one-way street. We're going to talk about the challenges that come with that. All right? So everybody understand now, when we talk about regional conferences, we're talking about, now, actually, your conference is the closest thing we have to a state conference, because your conference basically is one state, Florida. Has a little bit of Georgia. Most of the other regional conferences have anywhere from 4 to 7 states in them, okay? Southeastern is the only exception to that, all right? So regional, all the churches in a region. All right, now here's the question that you want to know. Why do we have, or why do we need two separate entities? Because I would imagine that the Florida Conference has a church in Naples too. Okay? Yeah. Right together. Yeah. Where I come from in South Central, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a regional conference church and a state conference church on the same street. Okay? When I worked in South Central, their headquarters was in Nashville. In suburban Nashville, 10 miles down the road, is the Kentucky 10 conference office. So how is that? Okay, how did we get to that? And are even regional conferences, which came second, are they necessary? Are they an unnecessary duplication? And so we're gonna answer that by looking at the first regional conference, which is Lake Region. The Lake Region Conference covers 5 states. It covers Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, right? Okay, so we're going to answer the question, are regional conferences an unnecessary duplication? But I'm going to do that by asking for 6 people to come down here and volunteer to help me illustrate. All right, so I need 6 people. There's 1. There's 2, 3. Okay, now I need 3 more. And I got 3 quickly. Now everybody else is, okay, that's 4. Come on. You're 5. And you're 6. Very good. All right. All right. Let church say amen for our volunteers. All right. All right. All right. Now, since you're getting here last, you get to be Mrs. Lake Region. You're Lake Region. We're going to put you right here. You're the regional conference. Got that? You cover 5 states: Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. But inside that same territory are 5 state conferences. Okay, so you get to be Illinois. You're the Illinois Conference. You're the Indiana Conference. You're the Michigan Conference. You're the Wisconsin Conference. And you're the Minnesota Conference. All right? Now, she covers the same territory that all of them cover. Okay, so she has a conference office, a nice one, in suburban Chicago. But Illinois has a conference office. Indiana has a conference office. Michigan has a conference office. Wisconsin has a conference. That's right. That's right. 5 conference offices. Okay. She has a conference president. His name is Elder Garth Gabriel. Okay. But Illinois has a conference president. Has a conference president. Has a conference president. Has a conference president. All right. She has a campground for their camp meeting. But he has a campground. Michigan has a campground. Big campground. And Minnesota has a campground. Okay. She has people who work in her conference office, like the youth director and the education director and all those kind of people who work in your conference office. But Illinois, yes, you have them. And you got all of them. Okay. So who is really duplicating services? Her or all of them? That's right. Who costs less money to operate? Her or all of them? Yes. Do you know that it literally costs tens of millions of dollars more to operate all of them than it costs to operate her? But regional conferences, represented by her, have grown over the last 80 years 4 times faster than all of them. Even though she operates with roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of their money. Okay? So, do we need both? We do. We do. But here's what's happening. They are saying, let's all come together. There's not going to be a black conference or a white conference in heaven. Let's all come together. But when they say, let's all come together, what do they really mean? Do they mean they are going to come to her? Or do they expect her to close down and come to them? So see, when we say, let's all come together, it sounds good until we discover what we really mean is they want her to close down, even though she's more productive and costs less money. Now, if you're running 2 businesses and you can only keep one, which one do you keep? The one that's more productive and more economical. But when you don't know your history, you swallow the Kool-Aid that says that we need them, but not them. And here's the scary part. I've been doing this for 7 years. The biggest pushback to regional conferences doesn't come from white people. It comes from people who look like us. That's why you need to know your history. All right, thank you very much. Let's give him a nice little hand here. I think the pushback comes because in the United States, the narrative is controlled by the majority culture, who says what we have is needed. I'll give you another example. When I first took this assignment, when I first took this call, Oakwood called me and said, Elder Edmond, we need you to come and talk to our students, our theology students, about why we need regional conferences. Do the same presentation that I'm doing for you all. For 7 years, I sat on the board of Southern Adventist University, which is a Caucasian-run institution. There was never a time when they said, okay, let's talk about why do we need state conferences. We are the only people who have to justify our existence. When people say, why do we have to have black churches? Nobody says, why do we have Latino churches or Japanese churches or Korean churches? We are the only people who have to justify our existence. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is in the United States, the narrative is controlled by the majority culture, who basically say, we're the norm, okay? You guys are the aberration, okay? And that's why it's important to know your history so you're not swallowing that, okay? All right. Because here, to go further, I've done this same presentation more than once in a Caucasian setting, at a Caucasian camp meeting. After I explain to them why we have regional conferences, they've gone from, well, let's all come together, which means to them, you all come to us, from saying, okay, now we understand why we have regional conferences. All right? Okay, and hopefully you'll understand when we get finished as well. Okay, so first we explain what they are. Now I'm going to explain to you how we got them. Okay? Okay, here's an interesting fact. There are 9 regional conferences. In the same territory covered by those 9 regional conferences are 30 state conferences. Do you know the difference in dollars that's between 9 conferences and 30 conferences? When I was a conference administrator, it took about $20 million a year to run our conference. Okay, so you multiply 30 conferences by $20 million, okay? And then multiply 9 by 20 and see the difference, okay? All right. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how do we get them? How do we get them? Okay? And I want to tell you that by telling you about 3 pivotal figures in regional conference history. The first one is a man named Charles M. Kinney. Charles Kinney was the first African-American pastor to get ordained. Okay, a few years ago, there was a lot of drama about ordination. You remember? The ordination was around the church's position that we do not ordain females. We don't. Okay, now, I'm not going to get into whether that's good or a bad thing. What I will tell you is this is what ordination is. Ordination is simply the church's recognition of the call of God upon a pastor's life. That's all that is. So when Dr. Simpson got ordained, the church is saying publicly, we recognize the call of God on his life. He's demonstrated the call of God on his life. My question is, why would you want to hire a pastor who's not called by God? Why would you want to do that? Presumably, every pastor you have, male or female, is called by God. Okay? Otherwise, why did you hire them in the first place? But what the church has said is, we will not recognize the call of God on anybody's life other than males. Our recognition is strictly gender-based. Okay? It's not based on what you do. It's based on your gender. Now, with men, it's based on what they do. We look at there's standards for ordination. You know, you need to baptize people. You need to do this. You need to do that. So with males, we look at performance. With females, we just look at gender, right? So, again, my question is, if you don't think women are called, then don't hire them in the first place. But once you hire them, it's kind of difficult to say, we will not recognize your calling. Okay. All right. Okay, so they recognized the call of God on Charles Kinney's life. This is in the 1890s, right? Okay, now, in the 1890s, there are very, very, very few, as in you can count on one hand, black pastors. Very, very few Adventists who are black. Okay? So he gets ordained in Nashville. And by the way, if anybody was called, it was this man, because he literally, when we studied his life, we discovered there were years where he went without getting paid. Years. Okay? Okay. So he gets ordained. That's one of the biggest days of a pastor's life. So he brings his family to his ordination in Nashville, Tennessee in the 1890s. Now you already know where this is going, right? So he brings his black family to sit with the Caucasian from a city. Because here's why. I need to put this in right now. Nobody is, I was talking to your pastor about this. Nobody is more Adventist than me. Okay? When I was growing up, I had no non-Adventist relatives on either side of my family. Right? My grandmother accepted this message after hearing it from Edson White on the Morning Star in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Those of you who know Adventist history, you know that takes me way back. Okay? Let me tell you what happened to me when I went to visit my wife, who, remember I told you, we're exact opposites. All my family is Adventist. It's just she and her mother who passed away and her sister. That's the only Adventist in a large family, right? So I go to visit my wife. She's my girlfriend at this time. And my father-in-law, wonderful fellow, not Adventist, right? So I go. This is before Breath of Life and all the television ministry we have. So I go into the kitchen, and my father-in-law is in the den, and I hear something as an Adventist I've never heard before in my life. You know what it was? I heard a television playing on the Sabbath. I didn't even know televisions worked on the Sabbath. I never heard. And then my mother-in-law is fixing my father-in-law's dinner. He's fixing chitlins. I never been around chitlins and frog legs. I said, this is a zoo up in here. Okay, so I'm Adventist. Went to all Adventist schools, then became an Adventist pastor, married an Adventist school teacher. My daughter's an Adventist school teacher, so I'm Adventist. But the Adventist church, though it is absolutely God's church, absolutely has a sad and unfortunate history of racism. It just does. The Adventist church was once upon a time every bit as segregated as the rest of the United States. Because the Adventist church made a decision that says, while we will be different in everything else, we eat different, we dress differently, we will not be different when it comes to segregation. And so the Adventist church was every bit as segregated. All right? So I got to tell you. So lest I come across as some angry black man, remember, I hired Caucasians in my conference. Okay? But to pretend that we didn't have a problem. See, this is the problem we have with history today. All the anti-DEI people, what they want to do is pretend like what I'm telling you didn't happen. They'll say, well, it makes our children uncomfortable. Well, if it makes your children uncomfortable to hear it, how do you think it make my ancestors to live it? Okay? What we should be saying is, no, we're going to talk about our history to make sure we don't do it again. Okay? We're not going to, sometimes people say, why do we need black history? Because our history is largely white history. There's so many things that we don't know about us. And that's because history has been taught from one perspective, right? Okay. So Charles Kinney, when he brought his family in and there was drama about these black people sitting with white people, then Charles Kinney was one of the first to say, we're not going to leave the church, but we might be better off with our own institutions. Okay? So here's pivotal figure number 2. He's pivotal without being an Adventist. So how is Claude Barnett pivotal in Adventist history without actually being an Adventist? I'm glad you asked that question. Right? He was a newspaper reporter, columnist, okay, back in the 30s and the 40s. All right? What do we know about people who were in journalism who are black in the 30s and the 40s? We know they were not writing for the Miami Herald or even the New York Times. We had up until about 40 or 50, we had black newspapers. Anybody remember black newspapers? Yeah, we had black newspapers. So he was one of the leading black newspaper people, and he had an Adventist friend who we now know was Owen Troy Sr. Owen Troy Jr. is one of our oldest retirees. Owen Troy and others told Claude Barnett what it was like to be black and Adventist in the 30s and 40s in a segregated church. He told him stories, he and other people told him stories about what happened in the 30s and the 40s when you were at the world headquarters for Seventh-day Adventist and it was lunchtime. Guess who was not eating in the general conference cafeteria? Everybody who looked like you. Okay. Couldn't eat. Could not eat in the general conference cafeteria. All right? At Andrews, you didn't go there. Okay, where I went for my seminary training, at Andrews, which was called Emmanuel Missionary College, in those days, you could eat in the cafeteria. Now, keep in mind, this was up north. This wasn't in the south. You could eat in the cafeteria, but only at the colored table. Okay? All right? So he wrote about that and embarrassed the church. Okay? But this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Okay? Lucy Byard. Lucy Byard lived in New York, had a form of cancer, deadly form of cancer, and wanted to be treated in an Adventist hospital. The Adventist church does health care very well. Okay, we run one of the largest non-for-profit healthcare systems that exists, right? I was telling your pastor, I said, now listen, because I used to be on the board of Advent Health. Healthcare is big in Florida, particularly Central Florida. Okay, got all kinds of hospitals in the Orlando and the Tampa area. Okay, Advent. So I was telling your pastor, I said, now I know you love your people, but if Advent Health calls you, you gotta go, because that's the only place in the church that pays well. Okay, the rest of us are on a pay scale. Advent Health is on a totally different pay scale. I mean, totally different, as in not just night and day, 2 nights and 2 days. Okay, yeah. As in, let me give you 2 more facts. Advent Health, which is only one of our healthcare systems. There's just one, okay? It is an $18 billion company, billion. The Seventh-day Adventist world tithe is less than $3 billion. So Advent Health is 6 times bigger in revenue than the entire Adventist church, all right? Huge, okay? So she wanted to be treated in a he said, they're warning you. No, listen. No, okay, he can stay. But I'm telling y'all, if they call me right now, this meeting is over. I'm gone. I'm gone. All right. Okay, so she wanted to be treated in Adventist hospital. And here's the problem, though. The closest hospital was Washington Sanitarium. Washington Sanitarium had a policy that, generally speaking, denied health care to black people. Okay? And when they made exceptions, you had to be treated in the basement. You could not be treated in the main part of this Adventist hospital. Okay, I'm glad you asked. This Lucy Byard story happened in 1943, 1940. Okay, all right. Okay, so in those days, you wrote, you were outside the city, you wrote to be admitted. This is not a great picture of Lucy Byard because there are not a whole lot of pictures, but she was very fair-skinned, okay? So she was admitted for a couple of reasons. One, it was done in writing. Two, she was very light. Now, what happened next depends on which story you believe. One story says they admitted her, which they did. That part is indisputable. They admitted her, found out she was black, and kicked her out. Okay, that's indisputable too. They did kick her out. What's in dispute is why. Did they kick her out because they thought she was white, and when they found out she was black, they kicked her out? Or did a few people know that she was white, but when she got there, they chickened out? Either way, black, right, I'm sorry. They thought, some people say they thought she was white, and when they discovered she wasn't, they kicked her out. Other people say, no, there was at least a few people that knew she was black, but then when she got there and the heat came, they chickened out. Either way, they admitted her and then they unadmitted her. All right? Sent her to the black hospital, which in those days was called Washington Freedmen's Hospital. Today it's called Howard University Hospital, and it's an Adventist hospital. Okay? And the CEO of that hospital is a lady that I grew up with, whose W-2 looks a lot different than mine. All right. She went to the black hospital and later, and within a couple weeks, died, causing a major uproar because in Washington, D.C., where she lived, there was an unusually large number of educated black people for that time. Okay, for example, Eva B. Dykes. If you went to Oakwood, you know that name, Eva B. Dykes. Eva B. Dykes was the first black woman, not the first black Adventist woman, the first black woman, period, to finish the requirements for the PhD. Okay, she went to that church. And then there are some other educated people. They did what Adventists do. They formed a committee. The interesting thing about this committee was there's a million committees in the Adventist church. When you are a church administrator, you are a professional meeting goer. Okay. No, seriously. When I was a conference president, every 3.5 days, I was either at a meeting, going to a meeting, coming from a meeting. Okay. And then people say, why do you do that? Well, the church is run by committees. This is. And the alternative is for it to be run by a few people. So it's not a bad thing. It just means that we get overly reliant on committees. And sometimes committees take a long time and don't really do what they need to do. Okay, but anyway, they formed a committee. It was called the Committee for the Advancement of Worldwide Work Among Colored Seventh-day Adventists. In other words, the Adventist version of the NAACP. All right? And so they said, listen, they met with the General Conference president. And they said, listen, and by the way, I suspect one of the reasons why there's no pastors on there is because the church could have put pressure on their employees. Okay? So that's the reason why they didn't have any church employees on there. All right? So at least that's my belief. All right? I think it was a good idea because in those days, the church had a lot. Since there were no regional conferences, you were pretty much out there by yourself as a black pastor. So you could get squeezed. And remember I told you what happened to Charles Kinney? There were just months he didn't get paid. I had one of my white conference president friends sent me the voted minutes of his conference where they said, listen, we are having trouble balancing our budget. Here's how we're going to balance our budget. We're going to cut the pay of our black pastor, or our black pastor. So they said, listen, enough. We've had enough of discrimination in education. At this point, there were virtually no schools besides Oakwood that black people could get into. Okay? So they said enough of discrimination in schools and in hiring. It took this church 100 years to have the first black vice president of the General Conference. 100 years. All right? So they said enough. And so as a result, the General Conference in their spring meeting, most people, when they think of the General Conference, they think of what happens every 5 years. The General Conference Executive Committee, which is like the church board for the General Conference, they meet twice a year, in the spring and in the fall. In their spring meeting in Chicago, the General Conference voted to allow what was called colored conferences. Y'all remember when we were colored? They voted to have called colored conferences. And the action that they took said to be administered by colored pastors and colored laymen. Why was that important? Because up until then, black people were not allowed to run much of anything in the church. The first couple of presidents of Oakwood were white. Oakwood was segregated. Okay? The white teachers sat on one side of the church, the black students sat on another side. At communion, the black students could not wash the white teacher's feet. Oakwood was segregated. Okay? That's how deeply rooted segregation was in the Adventist church. All right? Until about 40 or 50 years ago, even the work in Africa was not run by Africans, but by white Europeans and white Americans. And it wasn't until they sent those people home that the work exploded. Because it's always easier to work for people inside your culture. Okay? All right. So how did I go? I went backwards, didn't I? Kind of like the church. Backwards. Okay. So that's how we still got them. Okay? That's how we got them. Now, the other thing I need you to notice is, let me tell you another historical fact. Before we had regional conferences, the General Conference ran the work among African Americans. Okay? The way they did that was they had a department in the General Conference that was responsible for that work. Just like women's ministries, they're responsible for the ministry for women. The youth department, youth ministries, so they had what was called the Negro department. Okay? Right? But guess who ran the Negro department? The director of the Negro department was not a Negro. He was white. Okay? All right? And think about it. If you are my age, how many leaders did you know outside of the church? In other words, once upon a time, there were no black mayors, there were no black congressmen, when I say no, like one or two, no black senators, no black governors. The only thing we led out was the church, okay? And businesses in our own community, all right? All right, so what's important about this action is two things. Number one, it put our work in our hands. Number two, I said two things, actually three. The second thing that's important about this is that's a vote of the General Conference. In other words, black people didn't get mad and say, we out, we're going to form our own. Now, some denominations, that happened. That didn't happen with us. The General Conference voted. But here's point number three. The General Conference didn't have to vote that. They could have voted to fully integrate our church, which means faced with a choice between integration and regional conferences, the General Conference chose regional conference. Okay? All right. And that's what makes this all coming together stuff so ironic. Okay? Because the only reason why we had regional conferences in the first place was because our brethren were not ready to integrate. Okay? So now what our brethren are saying, we are ready to integrate to a point. Okay? Only to a point. Okay? And this is the harsh reality that we have a hard time coming to grips with in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's what Al Gore calls the inconvenient truth. Here it is. We have virtually no history of our Caucasian brethren remaining in any institution where they are not overwhelmingly in the majority. We have virtually no history of that. Our history is, if enough of you all come, they leave. Now that sounds bad, but it's true. And see, we, even as black people, because we are integrationalists by nature, okay? But it is hard for us to come to the reality that you cannot integrate with people who leave when you get there. Y'all got quiet. Okay, I'm gonna come to you. And I'm gonna put this quotation. Oh wait. Okay. Here's it's not the quotation isn't there, but here's the quotation. We as black people, we are in search of a diversity that is not in search of us. Okay. Now, that's real, but we keep chasing an ideal that doesn't exist. Okay? And I've gotten to the place in my life where I've switched from thinking it will come one day to recognizing that the only thing that's going to really bring us together on equal footing is persecution. When you run into the rocks and the mountains, you're not going to care what they look like, so long as they don't turn you in. Okay? But we have your pastor is from England. Asked him what happened to Newbold College. Okay? Newbold College used to be a Caucasian college until y'all start showing up. Now it's black. It's black. All right? That's a hard thing for us to swallow. And that's why some of us push against the idea. I was in a particular hotel in your state. I was checking in, and it so happened that the lady was Adventist. And she saw my credit card. It was a corporate credit card, and she saw who I worked for, and she said, "Oh, I don't believe in white conferences." Like what she didn't believe in was regional conferences. Okay, we have a hard time coming to grips with the reality of the fact that in a perfect world we wouldn't have what we have, but we don't live in a perfect world. And that world is becoming less perfect all the time. All right, now let me go to your questions. I'll go to you first and then you.
You move to an area to live as the black people come in the white people.
I was very hurt some months ago when a friend of mine called me. She's in the church. She grew up her son in the church. He left as a teenager. So he got married to a girl who was Adventist. She went to Kentucky, to a church in Kentucky. I think it was Lexington. And she noticed during the service, everybody was very cold to her. It was a dominant Caucasian church. After the church, one of the member of the church, a gentleman, came up to her and said, "I think you will feel more comfortable if you go to the other church down the road." And here's her son, who had left the church, was working on him to come back in church, that he was like very angry, was upset that his wife, had racial suggestion towards her. So it was very difficult.
That story, unfortunately, has been repeated a million times. I don't know of anybody my age or older either that either happened to you or you know somebody that it happened to. Okay? Yes.
Yeah, I have always of the opinion issue, and it's been supported by the fact that the black church in this country is really considered by many to be carrying the torch of what true Christianity is all about. And I have been an impression that coming towards the end of time, that whites would be coming into the and I've seen a few churches where this is happening. Not necessarily Adventist whites, but whites who are coming to the message because of one reason or another. I see a few churches where more of them are coming in. Don't you see that as a scenario that can play out?
What I do see, and this comes up a lot, because it's true. In mega churches, mega churches tend to be a little bit more integrated. Here's what you don't see. You do see integration in mega churches. What you don't see is integration in the inner city. In other words, that's another example of black people going to the majority culture. It is not an example of the majority culture coming to black churches. What has happened in this country is, and we need to praise God that things have gotten better. They have. Our Caucasian brethren have gotten to the point where they are willing to worship with us so long as there's not too many of us, okay? At the point that it becomes too many of us. And let me say parenthetically, all white flight is real. And to pretend otherwise is you're fooling yourself. White flight is real. All white flight is not racist. Now, a lot of it is, but all of it isn't. Some of it, and this is another thing that we have a hard time coming to grips with in the Adventist church. Some of it is based on culture. There is nothing wrong, hear what I'm saying, there's nothing wrong with people of the same culture coming together to worship. It happens all the time with people who come from this country from somewhere else, okay? And nobody sees anything wrong with Japanese churches, Korean churches, Latino. Nobody sees anything, Indian churches. Nobody sees anything wrong with that. It's only when it comes to black churches that we have to justify that. So I'm going to say it one more time. There's nothing wrong with people of the same culture saying we're more comfortable worshiping with each other, so long as that culture says, and nobody else can come. Okay? All right.
Is there a reason does that play a part in the fact that the growth in the black church is mostly from immigrants coming in, and there doesn't seem to be as much growth in the blacks?
It is not. It's not. You're right. You're right. It's not. Our growth rate has slowed, particularly in some places. Some of that is, no matter what culture it is, black, white, whatever, the more affluent we become, the more resistant we are to the gospel. That's across the board. And as the Lord has blessed black people have responded to that by becoming like our Caucasian brethren and becoming less, because the indigenous growth among blacks and whites has slowed down to the extent that on the East Coast, I cannot tell you the last church I preached in, and I'm at a different church pretty much every week. I can't tell you on the East Coast I'm talking about from New York down to Miami. I can't tell you the last regional church that I preached in that was not majority West Indian. Can't tell you. This conference is majority non-African American. No, this is the second largest conference we have. The largest is Northeastern, overwhelmingly non-African, indigenous African American. Trying to think of what's the other one. Allegheny East. Allegheny East. It's majority. So one of the challenges is we are not reaching black people who are native-born Americans. Part of that is we spend way too much time having what I consider to be one of the dumbest fights ever. The occasional fights we have between people from the Caribbean and native-born Americans. It's the dumbest fight ever. For one, and here's the number one reason why it's dumb. We all came from the same place. Well, I tell my West Indian brethren, the only difference between you and the rest of us is y'all got dropped off in better weather. That's the only difference. Okay, we all came. That's why when I took a picture with the pastor's wife, and I'm going to post it on Facebook and say, yeah, look where I was. I was able to take pictures outside while y'all freezing to death. All right. So I'm loving this. I'm gonna tell you what ruined me forever. My first church was in the Caribbean, in St. Thomas. And I have not been able to deal with cold weather ever since. And that's the reason why every January and February, I head down here. So that's why I'm appreciative of all the nice people in Southeastern that invite me. I'm going to find some people, even occasionally, I get some people in Florida conference to them. I don't care what conference you're in, so long as you're in Florida. Come on, say amen. All right. But it's a dumb fight. And it handicaps us because we do not have the kind of, I'm trying to think of the right word. We would have a different Adventist church if all the people who look like us got together. Okay? So we waste a bunch of time fighting each other. All right. Somebody else had their hand up. Yes, ma'am.
Ask you hit on it, and whether the church is managing or contributing to these tensions between African Americans and Caribbean.
Yeah, I don't think so. I really don't. You know, because now it depends on who you talk to. There are people who say, yeah, the churches. The reality is, I don't think we need anybody to manage us fighting each other. We kind of do that on our own. So I really think it's more us. But it's to our detriment. And I think it's to the church's detriment as well, the overall church's detriment. Okay. Yeah, and I would tell, and here's why I know this. One of the best things that ever happened to me was as a young student graduating from Oakwood who didn't get a call to a regional conference, but got a call to the Caribbean. It exposed me to an entirely different culture, and I'm a way better person for that. If for no other reason, I learned about, depending on where you live, rice and peas or peas and rice. Even I know that depending on where you live, it's rice and peas. I call it peas and rice, but I know some of you call it. I never heard of that before I went to St. Thomas. Love it. In fact, every time I come to Florida, I'm looking for rice and peas. I don't think I saw it today. I got to come back so I can have my rice and peas. All right. Expose me to another culture. It was one of the best things that could have happened to me. We are better together. Yes.
Coming from the Caribbean many 30-something years ago, that was the first thing I discovered, and it almost blew my mind. When I found out about the Black and the White Conference, it almost blew my mind.
Yes.
I could understand. It took me years to really understand what was happening. The first reason they gave was that, those black folks, that they were kind of passed on and not given the opportunity to really work, and so we had to, even our president, you saw him this morning, Pastor Owusu. He was, at the time, basically white church, and he was an interim pastor. He had just got ordained in West Indies, whatever, and he was just sitting in the church, barely given an opportunity to even speak in the church, and he was a pastor. And it took me a while to really understand. So do you think this is why that we decide, okay, well, since we have the qualifications, we can do the work just the same, but we're not being given the opportunity? Is that why we form a black conference?
Well, I think we formed a black conference because that we weren't getting opportunity. And as I'm about to demonstrate, show you why we still need them, it is still true that it's easier to reach people of your same culture. Now, that doesn't mean that we only have a responsibility to black people. It doesn't mean that at all. And I'll give you an example. Gentrification. You all know what gentrification is. Okay. Gentrification, with white people moving back into our neighborhoods, somebody's got to reach them. That's us. So we've gone from having a responsibility primarily, and we still have that responsibility, because if we don't do that, who's going to do that? Okay? But with gentrification, we now have responsibility to the people in our neighborhood who are increasingly white. Okay? But it's going to be harder to reach them because of the culture. So one of the things we need to start having discussions about is maybe in Southeast you're going to have to hire some white pastors to reach those people who are in your neighborhood, because it's not impossible, but it's easier to reach people inside your culture. Yes.
Earlier you were talking about the dumb fight between those from the Caribbean and African Americans, and it was not a fight, but we noticed that off the bat. When we started here, we wanted to focus on a group down in Naples area. They call it Black Power, mostly a lot of African Americans. And once they recognized our accent, it was different than what they're used to. And we kind of start feeling the kind of not really, I don't want to say not accepting us, but we started realizing, hey, we notice it.
And again, we are all creatures of what we're used to. Before I went to live in the Caribbean, I thought all West Indians sounded the same. Okay. Now, having lived there, I can listen to somebody say, "Oh, you're from Jamaica," But that's only because of the exposure. So I think as our church becomes more diverse, the accents become, because some of it was, okay, like my wife, you're going to laugh at this. When I got married, I'd been there 4 months and I went home to get married. Brought my wife to my church, and we're standing, they're giving us a little reception, and we're standing, shaking hands. My wife cannot understand a thing. I was literally her translator. Okay? Could not. She said, "Are they speaking Spanish?" I'm saying, "No, dear. That's English. It's just a different. It's an accent." So some of it. I mean, my it's a little different for me because of where I used to live. But like my son, it's like, what are they saying? Kind of a thing. So as our church becomes more diverse, it becomes easier to hear what you haven't heard before. All right. Okay, now let's close by doing two things. One, I'm going to tell you why we still need them. And then the last thing is some things that people believe about them that aren't true. Okay, here's 7 reasons why we still need regional conferences. Regional conferences allow us to control our own resources. Okay? Let me give you an example of that. See, that to the left, that's our office building. It's the headquarters for the regional work. We moved in there 2.5 years ago. That's a $9 million building. That's what it costs. It's on the campus of Oakwood University. Okay? It's a $9 million building. All right? Your brother-in-law leased us that property for $1 a year. Saved us a ton of money. We would have had to buy property someplace else. He leased it to us for $1 a year for 99 years. So when we moved in, we gave him a check for $99. So we're okay. All right. Now, but here's the other thing. When we moved in there, of that $9 million, you know how much we owed? 0. Why don't hear anybody? Yeah, that $9 million is debt-free. The reason why it's debt-free is because the regional conferences appropriated the money to build it debt-free. If there were no regional conferences, first of all, we wouldn't have that building. But second of all, if we had a building, we would have had to go to the bank and borrow that money. All of you who are paying mortgages, you usually pay back 3 times what you borrowed. Okay? So that's $27 million that's going into some area of ministry instead of a bank, because regional conferences control their own resources. When you control your own resources, that's the ability to control your own ministry. Right? So that's the first reason. The second reason is there would be no regional conference retirement plan without regional conferences. Regional conferences run their own retirement plan. All right? Before that, there was the North American Division retirement plan, which required you to work 40 years before you got the maximum, and the maximum was between $1,200 and $1,500 a month. That's why when I was a young pastor, I would see all these old pastors. When you're young, you think everybody's old. Well, you would see all these old, and I was saying, okay, why aren't these guys retiring? Now I know. They couldn't afford it. They had to work till they dropped. Okay? Okay, so in 2000, despite the fact they weren't paying anybody anything, they discovered they were $1 billion in the hole. $1 billion. So I don't want to hear about black people not being able to run anything. We didn't do that. Okay, $1 billion. So this is what the NAD said. They said, the program is over. We will maintain our commitment to the people who are already on it, but all the rest of y'all, you on your own. Literally, you on your own. Okay? What they do in state conferences is they, in essence, do help you with a 401k. Tell you, will you contribute some? We'll contribute up to 6% of your salary, and then you manage your portfolio yourself. Okay? All right. The regional conferences, ours is run by the worker doesn't have to put anything in. The conference puts in the money. Right? And the conference puts in enough money so that when I retire next year, because of between Social Security and what I'm getting from the regional conference plan and what South Central, which is the only conference that has a separate plan, between those three entities, what I'm making in base salary now is less than I'll make next year in retirement. I'm out to say amen. Because regional conferences control their own resources. Controlling your own resources means controlling your own destiny. I was just in Seattle. There are no regional conferences on the West Coast. Those guys depend to run their ministry on what the conference gives them. It's like getting an allowance. They get an allowance. And they have to run on what somebody, in regional conferences, we run on what you give us. Okay? All right. So that's the first, we control our own resources. Now, the more important reason is regional conferences are the best way to reach people of color with the gospel. And we've done that at the rate that regional conferences have grown 4 times faster than the rest of the church. Right? Regional conference gives people of color a seat at the denominational decision-making table. When I was a conference president, I was a delegate to General Conference because I was a regional conference president. If I wasn't a regional conference president, I would be sitting in a room where we were in a minority saying, hey, remember, we need some black people on. I don't have to do that because I was a president of a regional conference. So I automatically have a seat at the table, right? Reason number 4. We already showed you regional conferences are a better economic model. Remember we showed you that earlier? Okay. Number 5, regional conferences are one of the great success stories of our church. We told you they've grown 4 times faster. Black churches are often the only churches in the city limits of most cities. That's where the people are. And here's the last reason: racism is not dead, nor is it likely to die. And some of us have learned that the hard way recently. All right? Yes?
Does the regional black conferences afford to be so good with the retirement? Do they have more income generated from their churches?
No, we don't have. And I'm about to show you how it's a blessing of God. No, they don't have more money. They actually have less money. Okay? But regional conferences did something that was very important. We in essence have somebody from the outside running our retirement program, okay, where the NAD did it from the inside. They can, but here's their problem. First of all, in the church and in the world, white people typically do not follow black people. They don't. And then number 2, they're stuck with $1 billion hole. They still have to fund the retirement of the people. There's not that many left now, because the people that were that were retired in the year 2000, most of them started in the 50s and the 60s. They started their work. A lot of them have passed on. Okay, but here's something I didn't tell you that was sad. The people that were on retirement in the year 2000, the NAD said we're gonna keep paying you all. Here's what we're not gonna do. What's called the survivor's benefit, which we have in our program, that says if my wife outlives me, she gets 2/3 of what I get. Okay, the NAD had a similar plan, but when their program crashed in 2000, they took out the survivor's benefit. Now why is that unfortunate? Because the people who retired in 2000 were largely male, right? Which means the survivors were largely female. Those females were with their husbands in the 50s and the 60s. So what is the most likely scenario with those ladies who were in the 50s and the 60s? They weren't working. No. So all they had was what they were getting from the general NAD. But now they're not getting that anymore.
Question.
Which means they're not getting anything. Okay? So I'm gonna come to you. So I think we did. I'm not sure they learned from us, but we did learn from them. Okay? I'm gonna tell you the other thing that they did was the conferences funded their retirement. Florida, Southeastern. But the people who got money were not just the conference people, but also the union people and the division people. So they had people they hadn't accounted for. See, so we've learned from that. It's like, okay, we're not sending anybody any money if your entity is not paying into the program. They had people taking money out whose entities didn't put money in. Okay? And that's a prescription for going bankrupt. Okay, yes.
I'm just curious to know what is the percentage among African Americans in the Adventist Church?
Okay, in the Adventist Church itself, that's the world church.
No, African American here in the U.S.
Oh, in the U.S.
In the U.S., yes.
Okay. That's tricky. I'm going to tell you why it's tricky to know. I can give you what we think is an estimate. We've estimated that roughly 30% of the church is African American. When I say African American, I'm including people from the Caribbean, or non-whites, and the Latinos are a separate category. So the church is roughly 33% white, roughly 30% African American, and I think I'm giving you this last figure off the top of my head, some 20-something percent Latino. Those are the three largest groups. Now what's interesting is the church is 33% Caucasian now. In the 70s, it was 70% Caucasian. So the church is half as white as it used to be, and their percentage is dropping. Okay? Now, the African Americans seem to have leveled off. The group that's rising up are the Latinos. Okay? So that's probably going to be the largest group in the next 10 to 15 years. Right. Yes. But okay, before you do that, but here's what's tricky about that. It's hard. Since they're not counting every single person, they're looking at churches. But some of those churches that they may have considered Caucasian are not Caucasian anymore. Like in Florida, South Florida, especially in the large cities. In fact, anywhere in the city, if you have a church in a city, that church is almost certainly majority black. Okay? All right. Okay, I'm sorry. Go
Quick
ahead.
question. If I were to say my contributions, I know the offering stays here, but my tithe, what percentage stays at the regional conference level, and what percentage goes above that?
Okay, and I'm going to deal with that in a minute, but I'll answer it now.
Yeah.
Okay. All conferences have the same percentage responsibility to what's called the higher organization. All conferences send right at 25% of their tithe to the union, and then the union sends it on up to the, 25%. To what's called the higher organizations. And that's why the single most important unit of the church is the local church. The local church funds everything else. The people beyond the local church, they don't. I used to say when I was a conference president, I used to say, we in our office, we don't generate income, we just spend it. You know, all the money from that funds anything comes from the local church. Okay, and then so what one of our challenges is our young people hear that and it's like I want to see my tithe go where it's doing the most good, and what they forget is the reason why there's no other church that would trade their organization for our organization. We have churches and schools and hospitals literally around the world. Okay, nobody, except for the Catholic Church, nobody has the structure that we have. And the reason why we have it is because we share tithe. That's the reason why we have it. Okay, so take somebody like a Carlton Bird, right? You've all heard Carlton Bird, Breath of Life, great preacher, great leader. Okay, but I was in the conference when he got hired. Okay, Carlton Bird did not start out as the president of Southwest or the pastor of Oakwood or the pastor of Marin. He started off in Laurel and Soso, Mississippi, okay, which none of y'all have heard of, okay? He would have starved to death and never gotten to be the Carlton Bird that you know, except we share tithe. So that the Oakwoods of the world subsidize his salary, right? So what we need to say to our young people is we have a gospel commission to take the gospel to the world. And the only way you can do that is with an organization. And that organization has to be funded, right? No matter, you all and Dr. Simpson, y'all can baptize every single person in Naples, but it doesn't get us out of here. You hear what I'm saying? The only thing that gets us out of here is to finish the work. And that requires an organization plus the Holy Spirit. All right. You got another question. Okay, then we got to move on because I want it to be done at this point, not because I want to be done. I want to be respectful of your time. Okay, here we go. All right. Yes, ma'am.
I think we all know, I think we all do know about the role that, what, you can't hear? That the role Christianity has played, a distorted form of Christianity in its contribution to the whole enslavement process.
Yes.
And the exploitation of African Americans. Now, the black church, the research has shown that the black church has been very important, has been critical, they said, to changing that, to reversing that, and to using Christianity to really empower the enslaved.
Yes.
Okay. Now, my question is, and supposedly is continuing to do that. Is the Adventist Church then? Is that what? Well, we are not considered. We are not counted in this black history, in this black church. So, are we doing that? And are we committed to doing that? Is that under?
Yes. Remember, I told you one of the. On some level, we've done it too well because as our people become more middle class, not only outside the church but inside the church, that has implications on a number of levels. It means that it's harder to reach people outside the church, and the people inside the church are not always as committed as we were when we didn't have stuff. Okay? So we have empowered, and it's been on a number of levels, it's been a good thing. But for every action, there's a reaction. And one of the reactions of being middle class is a lesson of commitment. I'm gonna tell you another reaction that we're just at the beginning of discovering, and that is middle class families have fewer children. Okay? And so that's one of the things that has slowed our growth rate, because some of that growth rate was internal. Okay? I was telling the pastor, when I went to St. Thomas, everybody had 9 million children. I mean, just so much so that as a young single person who was about to get married, I was nervous. I was. I was visiting one of my members. She had 7 kids. And so I said, Mrs. So-and-so, now I'm getting ready to get married, and I don't want to have children right now. I said, so is there a way over here where people don't have children? You know, I was really asking her about birth control, but I didn't want to come out and say it because it looked like none of them had discovered that, because they all had 9 million kids, okay? Now, their kids did not, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, it must have been that. must have been that. Okay, their kids did not have 9 million kids, okay? So what having, this is what we're running up against now. Having fewer kids has implications. It has implications for our growth. It has implications for church school. It has implications for workers. Did you know that last year, Oakwood graduated 7 education majors? 7. Where are we going to find teachers? The year before, they graduated 5. Okay? So right now, we're saying, where are we going to find teachers? Okay? So that empowerment is good, but it's a double-edged sword. There's some good things that have come out of that, and then there's some challenges that have come out of that. But it definitely happened. Okay? No, it's not bothering me, but I do need to go. Go ahead and ask the question. Okay.
There are some ministries that are very active in social ministries. In other words, they see the growth of the work coming from more contact on social level with reaching out to the community services, and they're very active in that kind of a gospel preaching, and they don't retire from taking political stands, but somehow it seems as if they get pushback from the region. I'm talking about Black Ministers Regional Conferences.
Well,
get pushback not only in that area, but in the area of females in ministry. So could you comment on that?
Okay, I'll deal with this the non-female part. Although I'll deal with the female part. The pushback against females in ministries has not, from my dealings with the Black leadership, it hasn't come from them at all. They've been very supportive. In terms of getting involved in social ministries, there is, the good news is that particularly some of our younger pastors really into it. The pushback comes not from getting involved. The pushback comes from getting involved at the exclusion of winning souls. Okay? That's the pushback. Okay? So, because if you have a young pastor who, because I've spoken to some of them, I've said, okay, this is great, but has that translated into you expanding the kingdom where you are? And when they say things like, well, no, Elder Edmond, that's not why I'm doing that. And I'm saying, yeah, there's gotta be some commitment and connection to soul winning. So the pushback comes from that, not from the fact that you involve. When you get involved at the exclusion of expanding the kingdom. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. Okay. All right. Okay. We gotta go. All right. Okay. So now, okay. Here, I need everybody to hold their questions until I get to the end. Okay? Because I don't want to be like the pastor that they describe as Pharaoh because he wouldn't let the people go. I don't want to be Pharaoh. I don't want y'all going home and saying Elder Edmond was Pharaoh. He didn't let us go. All right. So I want to talk to you to end about 4 myths about regional conferences. Here's myth number 1. They're a relic of segregation. Okay? That's not true. But if it is true of regional conferences, it also has to be true of state conferences too. All right? All right. But see, we are the only ones that get held responsible for something we didn't do. All right. But again, that's what happens when you don't know your own history. Okay, here's the second one. This is a real widespread belief. I don't believe in black conferences. Let's all come together. If Southeastern went away tomorrow, the church would not be any more